It was a cold, rainy evening. The streets were quiet. Most people had already gone home. The wind was strong and the rain made soft tapping sounds on the pavement. Mrs. Helen, an elderly woman in her 70s, walked slowly down the sidewalk. She held a grocery bag in one hand and her umbrella in the other. Her coat was a little too thin for this weather, but she didn't mind. She had always enjoyed peaceful walks after shopping. But that day, something felt different. As she passed the small park near her house, she heard a faint sound, like crying. Helen stopped. She looked around. No one was there. Then she saw it. Behind the bench near the old oak tree was a small figure, a little girl. She looked no older than 8. She was barefoot, her dress soaked from the rain, her hair sticking to her pale face. She was hugging her knees, shaking. Mrs. Helen's heart skipped a beat. She slowly walked over. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "are you all right?" The girl didn't answer. She looked up, her eyes wide, full of fear. "It's okay," Helen said softly, kneeling down despite the wet ground. "I won't hurt you. I just want to help. Are you lost?" The girl still didn't speak. Mrs. Helen noticed bruises on the child's arms. Her dress was torn, and her feet were red from the cold. "Do you have a name?" Helen asked, trying to smile. Still no answer. Then slowly the little girl leaned forward. She got closer to Helen's ear, and then she whispered something, very quietly, just a few words. Words so soft, so broken, that Mrs. Helen wasn't sure if she heard right, but her eyes widened. Her hands trembled. She dropped her grocery bag. Without asking any more questions, she quickly took out her phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? "There's a little girl," Helen said. Her voice was shaking. "She's hurt and she just told me something. You need to come right now." "What did she say, ma'am?" Helen looked at the child, who now held on to her tightly like she was the only safe person in the world. Helen's voice lowered. She said, "There's another girl, locked in a room, and she's still there." Within minutes, police cars arrived. Lights flashed. Officers rushed out with umbrellas and blankets. The girl stayed quiet. She didn't fight. But her body shook as the officer wrapped her in a warm coat. Mrs. Helen told them everything she could. "She came out of nowhere," Helen said. "She whispered that someone named Emily is trapped. She said she saw her." The officer nodded. "We'll take her to the station. Try to talk to her more." Helen asked, "Will she be safe?" "Yes, ma'am, and thank you. You may have just saved someone's life." As the officers drove away with the girl in the back seat, Helen stood alone in the rain, her heart pounding. She looked at the bench. The same bench she had passed 100 times before. But today, something terrible had been hiding behind it. Back inside the police car, the little girl looked out the window. Raindrops hit the glass like tiny fingers tapping. She whispered again, but no one heard her this time. Only she knew what she had seen. Only she knew what still waited in that dark, hidden room. Before the rain. Before the whisper. Before the 911 call, there was silence. Inside a big, quiet house at the end of Maple Street, little Sophie stared out the window. Her hands rested on the glass. Her eyes followed the raindrops as they rolled down. Sophie was just 8 years old. She had soft brown hair and sad, tired eyes. She didn't go to school like other kids. She didn't have friends. She hardly ever smiled. She wasn't allowed to. Her father, Mr. Clark, was a strict man. He worked at home. His face always looked angry, even when he didn't speak. Then there was Clara, the woman who came to live with them 2 years ago. She said she was Sophie's new mom, but Sophie didn't believe her. Clara was cold. Her voice was sharp like broken glass. She smiled only when Mr. Clark was watching. But when he wasn't, she didn't smile at all. That morning, Clara brought Sophie some food and locked the door behind her as she left the room. Yes, locked. Sophie's room had a bolt on the outside, like she was a prisoner. She ate in silence, her tiny hands shaking. Then she heard something, a voice. Very soft, a girl's voice, crying. It wasn't the first time Sophie had heard it. But this time it was louder. She crept across the room and got close to the air vent near the floor. She pressed her ear against it. "Help. Please." It was coming from the basement. Sophie's heart raced. There was someone else in the house. Someone crying. Someone trapped. She wasn't alone. That night she waited. She watched her door. She heard the footsteps outside as Mr. Clark and Clara moved around the house. She counted the steps. She knew the sound of the front door locking. She knew when the hallway lights went off, and then when everything was quiet. Sophie made her move. She had found a small metal piece from her toy days ago. She kept it hidden. She used it now to unlock her window. She opened it slowly. The cold wind hit her face. Rain started falling, but she didn't stop. Sophie climbed. Out. She slipped and fell onto the wet ground. Her knee hurt, but she got up. She had to run. She didn't know where. Just away, far from that house. She had to find someone, anyone, who could help that girl. Back inside the house, Clara walked past Sophie's room and froze. The door was still locked, but the window was open. Sophie ran through dark streets, her feet bare, her dress soaked. She could barely breathe, but she didn't stop. Then, in the distance, she saw a woman with gray hair and a kind face. The woman had a grocery bag in one hand, an umbrella in the other. Sophie ran faster. She reached the woman, fell to her knees, and held onto her coat. The woman, Mrs. Helen, looked down in shock. "Are you all right?" she asked. Sophie didn't answer right away. She was tired, wet, scared. But she had to speak. She had to tell someone. She pulled herself up and leaned into Mrs. Helen's ear. She whispered 5 words, words that would change everything. "There's girl in chains." Mrs. Helen froze. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened, but no words came out. She dropped her groceries, then she grabbed her phone. "Wayne," she said with panic, "please come quickly. A little girl is here and she just told me something terrible." Back in the police car, Sophie sat wrapped in a warm coat, but her hands were still cold. She looked down, silent. The officers asked her questions. She didn't speak. One officer said, "She's in shock. We'll take her to the station. Give her time." Another officer whispered, "Do you think it's real, what she said?" The first officer nodded slowly. "We'll find out soon." But Sophie wasn't done yet. She knew what she saw. She knew who was still trapped, and she wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. The rain finally stopped, but the night stayed dark and heavy. Inside the police station, Sophie sat quietly in a warm room. A kind officer brought her hot chocolate, but she didn't drink it. She stared at the floor. Her lips stayed closed, but her mind was loud. She kept hearing the voice from the basement. The whisper, the crying, "Help me." Sophie looked up as a tall female officer entered the room. "Hi, Sophie," she said gently. "I'm Officer Maria. Can I talk to you?" Sophie nodded slowly. Maria sat down. She didn't ask too many questions at once. She knew Sophie was scared. She spoke softly like a friend. "Can you tell me about the girl you mentioned?" she asked. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She bit her lip. "Her name is Emily," she whispered. "She lives under the house." Back at Maple Street, Mr. Clark stood in the hallway, his arms crossed. Clara paced nervously. "She ran away," Clara hissed. "We should have locked her door tighter." "She's just a kid," Clark said coldly. "No one will believe her. She doesn't even talk." Clara wasn't so sure. "What if she told someone?" she asked. "What if the police come?" Clark looked toward the basement door. Then he walked to a shelf nearby and opened a secret drawer behind it. He pulled out a small key. "We'll take care of everything," he said, "just like before." Back at the station, Sophie was finally talking. "She's about my age," Sophie said. "She has long hair, she's thin, she cries a lot." "Where is she exactly?" Maria asked. Sophie thought hard. "She's behind a wall," she said slowly. "In the basement. There's a secret door. I saw it once when Clara dropped her phone." Officer Maria and her partner exchanged looks. They stood. "Thank you, Sophie," Maria said kindly. "You're very brave." 1 hour later, 2 police. Cars pulled up in front of Sophie's house. Clara opened the door with a fake smile. "Officers, is something wrong?" "We just want to ask you and Mr. Clark a few questions," one of them said. Clark appeared, calm as ever. "Of course, come in." Inside, the house looked clean and normal. No mess, no signs of trouble. Until they asked to see the basement. Clark's jaw tightened slightly. "Why?" "Just routine," the officer said. They walked down the stairs. The basement smelled old. Boxes lined the walls. Nothing looked strange, until Sophie, who had quietly followed behind with Officer Maria, pointed at the far shelf. "There," she whispered, "behind that." The officer moved the shelf. Nothing, just a wall. But Sophie pointed lower. "There's a panel, it slides." The officer pressed on the wood. It creaked, then shifted. A secret door opened. The air behind the door was cold. The space was dark, with no window. Inside was a mattress, torn blankets, a stuffed animal, and a bracelet with the name Emily on it. Clara gasped. "That's not ours. We didn't know. Someone must have broken in." But Mr. Clark didn't. "Speak." He stepped back slowly, eyes darting. Sophie looked around the small room. Her face fell. Emily was not there. The cold air inside the secret room felt heavy. Officer Maria stood still, staring at the empty mattress. No child, no sound, just that little bracelet with the name Emily. Behind her, little Sophie hugged her arms tightly. She felt the chill too, but it wasn't just from the cold. It was fear. "She was here," Sophie whispered. "She was here last night. She was crying." Maria turned to Mr. Clark and Clara. "Where is Emily?" Clark didn't answer. Clara looked down, her hands shaking. We don't know anyone named Emily." Maria didn't believe her. The second officer moved through the basement, checking corners, boxes, and hidden doors. But nothing more was found. It was like Emily had vanished. Upstairs. Clark sat on the couch, calm again. Too calm. "You're wasting your time," he said. "My stepdaughter clearly made up a story. She's had issues, imaginary friends, strange behavior." Officer Maria frowned. She glanced at Sophie, who sat silently beside her. "She didn't imagine that secret room," Maria said. "And the bracelet with a name." Clark just smiled. "No one lived there. Maybe she sneaked in there to play, that's all." But Maria had a gut feeling something was wrong, something hidden. She walked over to Clara. "You seem nervous," she said. "Why?" Clara's face went pale. She glanced at Clark, then back at Maria. And in that moment, Maria saw it. Fear. Real fear. That night, at the police station, Sophie slept on a small bed with a blanket around her. She was safe now, but her dreams were... She saw a dark room, chains, tears, and the voice again. "Please, help me." Sophie woke up gasping. She looked around in panic, then remembered she wasn't home anymore. Meanwhile, Officer Maria sat at her desk, going through files. She searched names: Clark, Clara, Sophie, Emily. And suddenly, she found something. A report from 2 years ago. Missing girl, Emily Rose, age 9. Last seen near Maple Street, foster child. Disappeared while walking home from school. Never found. Maria leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. It wasn't just Sophie's imagination. Emily was real. The next morning, Maria returned to the house with a warrant this time. "Step aside," she said. "We're searching everything." Clark tried to speak, but officers pushed past him. They opened closets, drawers, boxes. In the garage, they found a duffel bag. Inside, children's clothes, a drawing with the name Emily, and an old teddy bear. Clara broke down crying. "I didn't want to do it," she sobbed. "I told him it was wrong. I told him..." "What did he do?" Maria demanded. "Where is Emily now?" Clara cried harder. "He moved her. He said she was making too much noise. He took her somewhere else last night. The morning sun was rising, but there was no warmth in the air. Officer Maria stood outside the house, her mind racing. She had one name in her head now: Emily. She was real, she was in danger, and she could be anywhere. Inside the house, officers arrested Mr. Clark and took Clara into custody too. But that wasn't the end. Emily was still missing. Maria needed answers fast. Meanwhile, Sophie sat with Mrs. Helen at the station. The kind old woman held Sophie's hand gently. "You did the right thing, sweetheart," Helen said softly. "You saved someone." Sophie didn't feel brave. She felt scared. She looked up at Maria when she entered. "Did you find her?" Sophie asked quietly. Maria shook her head. "Not yet, but we know she's real. And we're going to keep looking." Sophie's voice trembled. "He took her last night, but where?" "At the station." Clara sat in the questioning room, eyes swollen from crying. "I didn't want this," she repeated. "He said no one would care, that she was just a foster girl, no family, no one looking for her." "Where did he take her?" "Clara?" Maria asked calmly but firmly. "I don't know," Clara cried. "He just said someplace quiet." He packed a bag, took the old truck, and left. Maria leaned closer. "Did he say anything else? A place? A road?" Clara paused. Her eyes darted around. "He once talked about a cabin in the woods near River Pine Hill." Maria stood up immediately. That was a start. The search begins. Maria and her team rushed toward the location Clara mentioned. They drove through long, winding roads surrounded by trees. It was quiet out there. Too quiet. Sophie stayed behind at the station watching the clock. Every minute felt like forever. In the woods, the police cars stopped near a dirt path. There were no houses nearby, just thick trees and an old trail. They followed the path on foot. Soon, they saw an old wooden cabin hidden behind trees and vines. It looked abandoned. Maria stepped forward and knocked hard. No answer. She pushed the key door slowly. It creaked open. Inside the cabin, the air was dusty and dark. They moved carefully, flashlights in hand. There were signs someone had been there recently. Food wrappers, a blanket, a broken cup. And then, a noise from a small room in the back. Maria's heart pounded. She turned the handle slowly and opened the door. What they found. A small figure sat curled up in the corner, shivering, thin, pale, dirty. It was Emily. She looked up, afraid. "It's okay," Maria said gently, dropping to her knees. "You're safe now." Emily stared at her for a moment, then ran into her arms. She cried. Maria cried too. "You're okay now," Maria whispered. "It's over." The forest felt colder. Now, Officer Maria held Emily close as they walked back to the car. The girl didn't say much, just held on to Maria like she never wanted to let go. But Maria couldn't stop thinking about the phone call. Mr. Clark escaped. That name now meant only one thing: danger. Back at the station, Sophie sat quietly, with Mrs. Helen drawing with crayons. Suddenly an officer entered and whispered something to Helen. Her smile faded. She turned to Sophie. "Sophie, sweetheart," she said softly. "Mr. Clark escaped, but don't worry, they're looking for him." Sophie froze. Her hands started to shake. She looked around the room like the walls were closing in. "No," she whispered. "He'll come for her." Meanwhile, in the woods, Maria and her team reached the main road. Emily was wrapped in a warm blanket now, sitting in the police car, but Maria stayed alert. Her eyes scanned the trees. Suddenly, footsteps. Someone was running nearby. Maria reached for her weapon. "Who's there?" She shouted. No answer. But in the shadows, someone watched. The truth about Mr. Clark back at the station: the police checked every camera, every road. But Clark was smart. He had taken a stolen car. He was off the grid. Maria sat with Clara in the interview room again. "I told you, he's sick," Clara said, crying. "He thinks Emily belongs to him." "Why?" Maria asked. "Why Emily?" Clara hesitated, then whispered, "Because she reminded him of his own daughter, the one he lost." Maria frowned. "He had a daughter?" Clara nodded. "She died in an accident. He never got over it. After that, he wanted another child, but only on his terms. That's when he started fostering and hiding. At the safe house, Maria moved Sophie and Emily to a secure house far from the city. There were guards, cameras, locked gates. No one could get in, or so they thought. Late at night, Sophie couldn't sleep. She looked over at Emily, who was curled up on the couch. Then, a shadow passed the window. Sophie ran to the door, but it was locked. She turned and shook Emily awake. "Emily, wake up. He's here." Outside, a car parked down the street. Inside, Mr. Clark sat in silence, staring at the safe house. His face was cold. His eyes didn't blink. He slowly opened the door and stepped into the darkness. The wind howled outside the safe house, but inside it was dead silent. Emily and Sophie sat together on the couch, holding hands tightly. Both girls could feel it. He was near. The lights flickered again. Then, a noise, tap, tap, tap. Someone was outside the window. Emily whispered, "It's him, I know it." Outside. Mr. Clark crouched in the shadows, holding a small knife in his hand. His eyes didn't blink. His mind was dark. "She was mine." He mumbled. "They took her from me. I'll bring her home." He moved to the side door, pulled something from his coat. A key. He had copied it long ago, just in case. Inside. Sophie heard the door click. Her heart raced. She pulled Emily toward the back room and whispered, "Hide in the closet. Don't come." Emily hesitated. Sophie nodded, serious. "Please." Emily obeyed. Sophie ran toward the hallway, just as the side door creaked open. The confrontation, Mr. Clark stepped into the house. Dark eyes, tight grip on the knife. He walked slowly, calling softly, "Emily, come to Daddy. We're going home." Sophie stepped in front of him, trembling. "You're not her father." Clark smirked. "You're just a child. Move." Sophie shook her head. "No, you can't hurt her anymore." Clark raised the knife. Suddenly, "Drop it!" Officer Maria's voice thundered from the doorway. Red and blue lights flashed behind her. 2 armed officers stood beside her. Clark froze. Then, he ran. He dashed toward the back, knocking over a lamp. But he didn't get far. An officer tackled him to the ground and pinned him down. The knife skidded across the floor. It was over. Aftermath. Clark was arrested. This time, no escape. He was charged for kidnapping, abuse, and child endangerment. Emily was taken to the hospital. She was weak but alive. Sophie was called a hero. Everyone praised her bravery, and Mrs. Helen was granted permission to care for both girls. 1 week later, Sophie and Emily sat under a tree in Helen's backyard. They were drawing pictures, smiling. Emily looked up and whispered, "You saved me." Sophie shook her head. "You saved yourself." "I just helped." They laughed softly, no fear, no pain, just peace. Final words, voiceover style for ending scene. Sometimes one whisper can change a life. One kind stranger can stop the darkness, and one brave little girl can light the way for someone who's been lost too long.